Black men are dying in the streets at the hands of other black men. That's nothing new, but it certainly has increased. And police brutality is increasing. We see this almost every single day. Unarmed black men being shot down. Poverty, an unequal playing field for our people. Issue after issue. Where do we begin to deal with these problems as a people? Do we start in our homes? Do we get in the face of the government and ask them to do what they're supposed to do? Because it doesn't seem like they want to. Where do we begin, Brother Minister?
The knowledge of self is the critical knowledge that our people have been deprived of. That most important knowledge produces self-love. And self-love diminishes the desire in us to see each other as an enemy, but to see each other as God would have us see each other, as flesh of each other's flesh and blood of each other's blood and bone of each other's bone. Self-knowledge produces the spirit of self-determination. Self-knowledge and self-love makes us never want to boycott our own brother or sister in business, but to support each other. Self-love would make the money that is in our community, which makes us the greatest consumer people in the nation. So with $1.1 to $1.5 trillion in our hands, we are the target for business interests that have no interest in us. But if our self-love, our self-knowledge, our self-respect, our self-determination were there, then if 10% of $1.1 to $1.5 trillion remained in our community, then what we beg others for, we would have the necessary means to build institutions that create self-respect and the respect of others. It can't start with the government. It can't start with others. It has to start with self. If I may just add something else to that, my dear brother, I was recently in Atlanta, and Martin Luther King III visited our suite, and we talked about the very thing that you started this conversation with, the loss of what we thought we gained, the vicious murder cycle that is going on in our communities. It would be the highest level of hypocrisy for us to go to Washington and demand that the government give us justice when the problem starts in our community, and if we're not man and woman enough to attack the problem in our community, then going to the government is an act of vanity and an act of hypocrisy. It's got to start with us. So I said to my dear brother Martin King III, your beloved father taught us of nonviolence. he believed that nonviolence toward our white oppressor and our love of them would wear down their hate of us, and it would produce a change in them. So many of our people, young people as well, followed Dr. King and were beaten, brutalized, imprisoned, and out of a bloody beating on a bloody Sunday, and out of the bombing of a church in Birmingham that killed 4 of our babies, came laws. But we had to die in order for a heart to change, which never changed. It accommodated our death by giving us a public accommodations bill, and Bloody Sunday was the means of our getting a voting rights bill. Yet in 2013, the Supreme Court took that away from us, the enforcement part of that bill. So I said to Brother King, I said, we have been nonviolent, showing love to an enemy who has never shown love to us since our fathers set the soles of their feet in the Western Hemisphere. Why shouldn't we organize our leaders, our preachers, our teachers, and turn that love inward and preach nonviolence to us in the solving of our problems with each other? Why don't we, the church people, the civic leaders, others, set up conflict resolution centers in our community where the conflicts rage on, even at the highest levels? I'm a preacher. My brother over here is a preacher. I don't like that preacher, but I am a friend with this one. So I talk in my pulpit against this preacher, or I talk against this Muslim leader. I talk against, so the followers impacted by our envy and jealousy and enmity toward each other, we put it down into the followers. The change has to take place within us. And that's the most difficult jihad. If I could use that language, it only means an intense struggle. And the lesser jihad is the physical one, where you fight an enemy. The greatest jihad is the struggle with the weakness of ourselves. And that's the jihad that we must engage in order to change the horrible reality of what's going on in our communities.
God have mercy. I need a minute to think about what you said. You want to ask the next question?
Sure. I was a student at Southern in Baton Rouge in '95. I was a sophomore. And I remember going back and forth with my dad about attending the march. And he had forbade me to attend because there was this thing about Farrakhan being anti-this and anti-that. But I noticed in my studies at Southern that so much was happening with black men, and it was like, Dad, I need to go. I went to D.C. with only $12 in my pocket, and it was one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever seen or witnessed in my life. I noticed this year, 20 years later, that you're opening up the march to women and children, not just men. What made you decide that?
20 years ago, I saw black men under assault. I saw media presenting a picture of us to ourselves and to the world with various movies that they were showing. Colors, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, like we were the second menace, but they never showed us who the first menace to society was. I saw this being spread all over the world, and I saw things being written that the black community is the Achilles heel of America. This great city of light on the hill that President Bush, H.W. Walker Bush, projected, this great city. And Clinton came behind him with that. But that city of light on the hill, the light is being covered by this community of black people who are savages. Elijah Muhammad taught us that a savage is a person that has lost the knowledge of themselves and is living the life of a beast. And in our communities, that's the kind of life we're living. We treat each other worse than animals treat their enemies, if you will. There's a way that an animal kills another animal, but they kill to eat. They kill to survive. We are destroying each other for little or nothing. Then I saw drugs and the so-called war against drugs, which was really a war against black people in particular and black men. So I decided to go on tour. For about 3 years, I started a Stop the Killing tour, and I came here to Philadelphia and went to many, many cities. Then during that time, I was in New York at the Javits Center, and David Dinkins was running for re-election. And I was going to rent, or we, the Muslims, were going to rent Yankee Stadium, which held about 65,000 people. And the black leaders in New York begged me not to come. They said, if you come, Mr. Dinkins may lose re-election. I said, but brothers, if I do come and we fill the stadium, you can come to the stadium and represent Mayor Dinkins. They didn't even hear me. They said, Farrakhan, if you put off your visit to New York, when you come, we will back you. I put off my visit. Mr. Dinkins lost by 65,000 votes. And when I came to the Javits Center to pick up on what they promised me, that if I stood down to let them get him reelected, they would come out and support me. None of them came out to support me but the Reverend Al Sharpton. And during that speech, I asked them, the men, if I came back to New York to talk to only men, would you come out? And they raised their hands and said they would. I came back to New York at the 369th Armory on 142nd Street and 5th Avenue, and 14,000 men came out. And during that meeting, it came out of my mouth, I want to take 1 million men to Washington. After I saw it come out of my mouth, I wondered could such a thing happen? We came to Philly. We spoke to 10,000 men in, I think it was the Civic Center.
Yes.
It was the Civic Center. 10,000 men showed up. In the audience was Reverend James Luther Bevel, former disciple of Dr. King. I went to Washington, 14,000 in the Armory. I went to Atlanta, 20,000 in the former CNN place where the basketball players played. I went to Houston, 35,000. I went to New Orleans, 10,000. I went to LA. Everywhere I went, black men came out by the thousands. And I talked about the Million Man March. And I told them, I'm not going to send no money for nobody to come. You have to put your own money up to show that you're serious about this march. I told them you cannot bring any weapons, no guns. I want to show you that our unity and our brotherhood will produce a kind of peace that you've never seen before. There was opposition. Some of the leaders were opposed. Your dad was opposed because they, you know, Farrakhan is this hater, this anti-Semite, he's this, he's that. But on that day, October 16th, God had blessed us to gather pastors from practically every denomination. We had activists, we had nationalists, we had the sororities and fraternities, the Masons, the Shriners. And you as a younger man were there to see what you never thought you would see, and experience a peace and a brotherly love that we never thought could exist among us. And when white folks saw nearly 2 million men showed up, they knew that we had a power. Black leaders said to me, oh, Farrakhan don't know nothing about marching. You don't call no march on a Monday. He should talk to us about marching. But I called it on a Monday because I wanted to see what are you willing to sacrifice so that God will know you are serious about this principle of atonement, which was given to me by Reverend James Luther Bevel. And the nationalist community said atonement, reconciliation, responsibility. Those three principles were active that day. And if you recall, 25,000 orphans gained a home. Black men went home and reconciled differences with their family members. Husbands atoned for failing to be the type of men that we should be. And baby mamas, the men that gave them babies came back and wanted to participate as a father. I sent those black men to join any mosque, church, synagogue, temple that taught spiritual values. I said, join an organization that is working for the advancement of our people. I didn't say join the nation. Join the nation if that's what you want, but there are other organizations out there that are working to better our people. Join an organization and become active. Joe Lowry told me that it was ringing off the hook at SCLC, the NAACP, the mosque, the Sunni mosque. Everybody benefited from the Million Man March. And 1.5 million new voters became registered. And the enemy couldn't take it. So they went to work And for nearly 20 years, they kept me out of black colleges, universities. The media rejected me. I could not be on any television show, but before that, you would find their best minds questioning me. None of them could defeat our arguments, so they decided, take him out of the media. And there are some people who recently began seeing me again on social media. They said, I thought that Farrakhan was dead. And they literally dried up the people's hearing of Farrakhan. So 20 years later, we're not going for atonement. 20 years later, we're going for justice. Justice or else. And it's the or else that frightens people. And I'll stop there, and if you wish to take it to the next level and talk to me about it. But that's how that march came to be. And by the way, while I was at the march, Reverend Jackson, who had opposed the march in the beginning, near the end he came. And in my hotel room, he said, Farrakhan, how many minutes will you give me? And I said, Reverend Jackson, I can't give you any minutes. Just go up and say what it is you wish to say. I know nobody would do that for me. But he spoke about 20, 25 minutes. And in his talk, he mentioned what was going on up in the Congress. They were arguing over prison sentence for crack cocaine and powder cocaine. I didn't know that until that moment that my brother spoke it. They passed that bill. Mm-hmm. And under Clinton, who left Washington when we came in that day, Clinton put the touch of death on black men. By 2, 3 strikes, you're in for the rest of your life. And more black men were incarcerated under Clinton than before. And now, Mr. Miller, you know, during that 20 years, since the Million Man March, it became clear that the CIA was bringing drugs in to the country like they did with the opium wars with China. They brought opium in, took the silver out. They brought cocaine in and took some of our consumer dollars out. And Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and others used the money to foster the war in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas. So here we are now, drugged up, gangs, guns, no more trade schools to teach us trades, no jobs in the inner cities for our people, factories closing, and jobs sent to cheap labor in third world countries. So the black community is left in the lurch. The last time I was in Philadelphia, Brother Jerron was asking for those who had canned goods, because in a certain part of the city, people had no food. But there's all these vacant lots. And the inner city is a food desert, not only in Philadelphia, but all over the country. Nobody is showing us urban farming, how we can raise organic food. Some are showing us. I will change that. But not enough. And there's no participation between the inner city and the city government to take the abandoned buildings, teach our young people the trades, let them rehabilitate these buildings, put them back on the tax roll, and we begin to own where we live and have a reason to become a city councilman, to pass laws to protect what we build. And so now our community, coming back to what you opened with, is a cesspool. Crooked cops are in our community. They know where the drugs are. They attack the drug dealers. They take the money and turn in a little and keep a lot. When we come in to talk to our people when we were in the community, the next week when we come back, our young people are running from us because the police followed us up and told them, these young people, look, you know, you have a record, and if you hang out with those Muslims, you better run away from them because they'll get you put back in prison. So I call for 10,000 fearless black men. That death is sweeter than continued life under our conditions and under tyranny. When I said it, white folks said, Farrakhan is calling for 10,000 fearless men to go kill white people. I never said that. They said it. And tonight I want to talk about what the 10,000 fearless men must do. We've got to start where we live and make our own community safe for our women and children and the elderly. We have to now stand in the gap between the guns and help our young people to resolve their beefs in an intelligent way. And then with the aid of city government, begin to do things to give money to the young people, that there's an economic advantage in learning a trade. There's an economic advantage in organic farming. There's an economic advantage in owning property, rehabbing it and selling it and putting money in a treasury that you can use to expand economic development. All of this can be done, but it's going to have to start with us risking our lives in the war zone of the black community. And we are willing to do that. And I believe we can raise 10,000 men in Philadelphia alone. This is a great city with strong young black men and women. And if they will agree to submit to our training, we will train them and we will go in our community and make it peaceful. We don't ask for no money. That's our duty. But the money will come. We did it in Washington, and money came. The government saw what we did, and Jack Kemp, who was running for vice president on one of the election cycles, he brought it before Congress, and the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development gave money to the Muslims to clean up infected and infested project areas, and we did. And the Jews were so frightened that money from government was coming to members of the Nation of Islam. They thought the money was coming to me, but it was going to the brothers who were protecting the communities. And then they cut off that money from the government. And that program began to die, but we can build it again. But we have to do it now. We're forced to do it now. Otherwise, we'll become extinct.